another point worth considering, which is this, that loneliness is not the same as being alone. Loneliness is not the same as being alone. You could be surrounded by acquaintances and coworkers and colleagues and friends and even family and still be the loneliest person in existence. Take Albert Einstein as an example. Einstein was by far the most famous scientist of the last century. I think probably the most famous scientist in human history. He lectured at Princeton. He advised presidents during the nuclear era. He wrote extensively on a wide range of topics. He was consulted by hundreds of thousands of people in his lifetime, and yet it was Einstein who remarked, "It is strange to be known so universally, and yet be so lonely." All the lonely people, where do they all come from? I'll tell you. They come from every neighborhood, and every station, and every age bracket, and every walk of life. You see, loneliness is no respecter of persons. It hits each of us at various points in our lives, and maybe at various points in the year. And with a topic like loneliness, it would be very easy for me to turn this into a pop psychology lesson. As in, 6 steps in how to cure loneliness. And I'm confident, in case you're wondering, I'm confident I could do that, and I could back each point up with a Bible verse or a Bible passage. That's not the challenge, because I believe that all truth is God's truth. But I'm not going to give you that type of message this morning. You see, anybody here with internet access can do a Google search on how to cure loneliness, and in 0.2 seconds you can come up with 1.1 million sites that will give you an answer to the question. Maybe not the right answer, but that will give you answers. And if you're wondering how I got that 0.27 seconds, I tried it this week. I believe that if you're here this morning, I mean, you've got 100 other things you could be doing this morning. If you're here this morning, what you're really after, even if you wouldn't articulate it this week, is God. You're after God. Ever wonder what God thinks about loneliness? When we look in the Bible, we find that loneliness is the first thing that God named not good. The first thing that God named not good. Some of you may remember that right back at the very beginning, at creation, before even the fall of humanity into sin. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 18, God says, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper, a companion, suitable for him." It is not good for people to be alone. Man, do I know that. This past week, Barb was out of town for 4 days because of work commitments. And I'm telling you, folks, it was not good in my home. Ask my kids. I was more than ready for her to come back. And you single people who are parents this morning, you have my utmost respect because you do this week in and week out. Now, what's interesting is that God created human beings to be in relationship with Him. When our first parents, Adam and Eve, chose rebellion over obedience, that relationship with God got broken, and that is symbolized through the fact that they got banished from the Garden of Eden. They were expelled from the Garden of Eden. And then, get this, shortly thereafter, then Adam and Eve's son Cain murdered his brother Abel. And Abel was expelled from the family, and he was forced into exile. And so our relationship with fellow human beings was permanently altered as well. And we know this is true because ever since Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, humans have been choosing isolation and loneliness over intimacy with others and, by way of extension, intimacy with God. Next question. Ever wonder how God feels about loneliness? Genesis chapter 16 includes a moving story about a woman named Hagar. And Hagar was a woman who didn't hold a lot of esteem or respect in her culture. She was a maidservant, a maid for a woman named Sarah who was married to Abraham. And if you've ever heard of Father Abraham, that's the Abraham that I'm talking about. And when Sarah was unable to conceive or to bear children, even though God had promised her directly that He would, she grew impatient. And in that culture, I can understand that maybe because there was huge pressure on women who are married to bear children. And in particular, to bear a son. because through the son, the family name lived on, and all the rest. Huge pressure in that culture. And so, kind of at wit's end and growing impatient with God, Sarah asks Abraham to sleep with Hagar, her maidservant. Maybe at least then we'll have the sound of children's voices in our house. And that culture too, because the maidservant didn't have any respect or esteem, that child would basically be Abraham and Sarah's child. So Abraham does this, and Hagar conceives. But instead of bringing her joy, watching Hagar grow increasingly pregnant makes Sarah jealous. And she begins to mistreat Hagar. And it gets so bad that Hagar flees for her life. She runs away and she lands up in a desert. And she has nowhere to go. She's at a well. When you're in a desert, you stay by the well, because if you go away from the well, you're going to die. And so she's at this well, and she's utterly lonely and alone. I don't know how many months pregnant she is, but she's carrying a child. And God sends one of his angels to her to minister to her. And the angel tells her not only will she survive, she'll survive, but also the child that she carries will survive. A very real concern for any expectant mother. And not only would that child survive, her child to be born would be a son, and he would grow up to be a great man, and she would have more descendants than you could count. She would have more descendants than you can count. Well, Hagar is so encouraged by this news from the angel, from this message from God, that she starts praising God, and Hagar gives God a brand new name. A name that was never ever used in history up until that point. God never got this name before. But this Arab lady, ultimately from Egypt, loves God, and she says, "You are the God who sees me." You are the God who sees me. How's that for a cool name? You are the God who sees me. I mean, it's one of the many names that we can use to call out to God. And it's as true today as it was the day that that angel brought that message of encouragement to Hagar. You are the God who sees me. And I would ask you this morning, what better name could we have for God at Christmas time than that? God sees us. I don't know about each of you, but when I'm going through times or periods of loneliness, simply remembering that my God is a God who sees me, not me as in humanity, but me as in Darrell John Bierman, born April 3, 1969. It buoys my spirits and makes me just a little bit more hopeful. See, my God is big enough to see every person in every place at every moment of every day. But I'm also not too small or insignificant to catch his attention. The Creator God of the universe sees me, and he sees you. And God's concern for lonely people goes way beyond simply seeing them. The essence of the Christian Christmas message is this: the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. God's Son Jesus came into this world and made his dwelling among us. God with us. He entered in. Think about that. And because God entered in through Christ, one of the most comforting truths of the Christian faith is that we have a God who not only sees us, but a God who understands us and can relate to every emotion that is in the scope of human emotions. God knows how you feel. Isaiah chapter 53 verse 3 says that Jesus was despised and rejected by men and women, that he was a man of sorrows, and he was familiar with suffering.